Charlie Kirk, we carry the flame. Ooh, what a fun little week it's been. If you don't believe me, the Supreme Court a couple of days ago has said that they're going to be listening in on Trump's initial thought process to the first section of the 14th Amendment. Interesting. Well, let's talk about the 14th Amendment, shall we? Because President Trump and many others on the political right have been wanting the removal of the 14th Amendment, or even some of the sections as of late, and it's been heavily discussed since then. They debate on whether or not it's for anyone that is born or naturalized on this soil, or if it was intended only for slaves during that time. But the language is crystal clear, and we're going to discuss that in this video. But before we do, if you like this video and want to learn more about our constitutional amendments, then share, comment, like, and let me know which one I should talk about next. Now, before we talk about the 14th Amendment, we have to discuss its origin. So let's go back a couple of years. In fact, a couple of hundred years, to the bloodiest time in American history, known as the Civil War. The north of the country, known as the Union, fought the South, that was known as the Confederates. You see, the South seceded from the Union of the United States after the election of Lincoln because they wanted to continue with slavery. This was their main source of income, and while the North was slowly but surely banning slavery in the states, the South wanted to keep it intact, especially when this next step for the U.S. was Western expansionism. Well, after the traitors lost the war and Lincoln was, assassinated, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were created and subsequently ratified over a 5-year period between 1865 and 1870. But here's the most important, interesting thing of it. The 13th and the 15th Amendment are very simple and direct, whereas the 14th Amendment is very stacked. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. That's the 13th Amendment. And the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States, or by any state in account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And that's the 15th Amendment. However, the 14th Amendment is the one that's stacked with so many unique sections, it's almost like a bill that gets passed in the House and the Senate. So, let's break it down. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Well, what this means is very simple. It comes from Old English common law. Basically, if you are born on this soil or provided legislation through means of like marriage or even a green card like system, you are hereby a U.S. citizen. This would mean that you are under our laws and also receive more constitutional rights than non-citizens would be able to receive, like the right to vote or to hold federally elected offices. Now, let's get to Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for their choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any male inhabitants of such state being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crimes, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. So This one basically helps with the population counting in regards to the Electoral College, and also repealing the 3/5 compromise for Black Americans that were granted their freedom after the Civil War. You see, the 3/5 compromise was created back in 1787, but was never ratified in other amendments. So this is where Section 2 comes perfectly into place. Now, every man under this amendment has the same equal rights under the federal law at this time frame. It also states that if a state denies someone the right to vote, which at the time it was 21, the amount of representatives can be reduced to the number of disenfranchised citizens. So if you have a state that has 4 senators or 4 members of the House, and you have 2 people that were disenfranchised from this thing, then 2 of those representatives would be removed, to keep it fair. Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress, or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who have previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may be a vote of 2/3 of each house. Remove such disability. I wonder, why do you think it would be this one specific section that they would want to remove? Section 4. The validity of public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim of the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. In the most simplest of terms, the U.S. debt that was accrued during the war is validated, while Confederate debt is voided, meaning the Confederate traitors can suck it financially. Now, there are many cases that do fall under the 4 main sections of the 14th Amendment, but we'll go over some of the most noticeable cases for you today. In fact, some of these cases, you'll begin to understand why they utilize those specific sections. However, Section 4 doesn't really have a perfect example. The best example that I could even find was Perry v. United States in 1935, but we will go over that after the other 3 sections. So let's start with Section 1, because there are 3 major cases that I want to focus on due to the nature of this first section. Wong Kim Ark v. United States in 1898, Brown v. Board of Education 1954, and Obergefell v. Hodgins in 2015. Wong Kim Ark v. United States is a fundamental one when it comes to the birthright citizenship clause. You see, Mr. Ark was born in San Francisco in 1873, but was denied re-entry to the United States due to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act specifically targeted all Chinese immigrants and banned them from becoming United States citizens. But here's the kicker. Wong was actually born in U.S. soil 5 years after the 14th Amendment was ratified, so it was still going through the major understandings during that time frame. Though, in a 6-2 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Wong, stating that, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, end quote, should be interpreted, quote, in the light of the common law, end quote, which states that this portion only focuses on those born to foreign rulers, diplomats, foreign public ships, or born to enemy forces engaged in hostile occupation of the country's territory. Many people in modern times tried to dispute this ruling. However, multiple Supreme Courts and appellate courts have denied those disputes, calling Wong Kim Ark a controlling precedent to birthright citizenship. Let's fast forward, shall we, to Brown v. Board, because that is an interesting case and a huge victory in regard to the civil rights progress here in the United States, because it focuses on the Equal Protection Clause, because public schools were participating in racial segregation. It's very interesting because it sort of overrules the Plessy v. Ferguson of 1896. You see, Plessy v. Ferguson stated that racial segregation, in fact, did not violate the Constitution so long as the facilities of each race were equal in quality. However, Brown makes the perfect argument that separate facilities inherently were unequal. So in a sweeping 9-4 decision, the courts were in favor of the Brown family, stating that, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs and others similarly stated for whom the actions have been brought are, by reason of segregation complained of, deprived of equal protection from the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment." End quote. Now, we're going to fast forward one more time to Obergefell v. Hodgins. And this actually is a good segue into Section 2 because it is perfect for Section 1 and 2 of the 14th Amendment. It helps pave the way to same-sex marriages due to both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. Multiple cases in lower courts were showing that the bans on same-sex marriage were both constitutional and unconstitutional, depending on which state you resided in. Many of the decisions were appealed to the Sixth Circuit, which dissented due to Baker v. Nelson of 1972. Similar to Plessy v. Ferguson, Baker v. Nelson stated that restricting marriage licenses to persons of the opposite sex, quote, "does not offend the U.S. Constitution." However, the Supreme Court disagreed in 2013. After a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court overruled Baker v. Nelson and stated that the 14th Amendment requires all states to grant same-sex marriage and recognize same-sex marriage granted in other states. And here's the best part, coming from Justice Kennedy himself. Quote, "No union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, two people become something greater than what they once were. As some of the petitioners in these cases demonstrate, marriage embodies a love that may endure even past death. It would misunderstand these men and women to say they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law, and the Constitution grants them that right." End quote. It's beautiful for Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. But Section 2 is a bit harder to find because it's not normally used, but it was enforced in the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination in voting and has been expanded 5 times for other minority protections. Both Brown v. Board of Education and the Voting Rights Acts helped tremendously with the civil rights legislation. Because of these civil rights legislative strengths, things like the Louisiana congressional map case was deemed unconstitutional and against the VRA, and because they found that even though they had second majority black district, plaintiffs argued that this was a form of racial gerrymandering. At the moment, it's still going on, but this could be the perfect case to utilize Section 2 and the Voting Rights Act. Now, we did 1 and 2 fairly quickly, but let's focus on Section 3 really quickly because this focuses solely on insurrection and rebellion against the country. But here's the problem with Section 3, and unfortunately, it's extremely specific. The text does not specify the presidency as an office or not. This is one of the major points in contention that they had with Trump v. Anderson. It's such a weak argument though because the implication is defeated by the technical argument. And this is what the Supreme Court stated after they reversed the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to keep Trump off the ballot due to their version of Section 3. And last but certainly not least, Section 4. Now, while there were recent cases regarding the debt ceiling, the section mainly focused on making sure Confederates weren't given the chance to get their debts paid off. Branch v. Haas in 1883 is the best representation of Section 4 because the federal court refused to the contracts that involved with Confederate debt. There was a breach of contract of sale of these 200 bonds, which were Confederate coupon bonds. And since these bonds were created for and by the Confederate traders, Section 4 was able to stomp this out without issue. Now, speaking of issue. The president's main issue is the lack of understanding of how the 14th Amendment works and why it has to remain. Specifically, since it's his job to understand these things. He wants to go after Section 1 specifically because of the argument that he's making with the Supreme Court, which is if your parents are illegal and you are born on this country, then you shouldn't have the right of being a citizen. He, like many others, on the political right, have no idea what would happen if they removed the whole 14th Amendment. First, let's just start with him wanting to remove the first section, or even adjust the first section, because citizenship becomes not only a black hole of chaos due process at the state level becomes null and void. If you think cops are bad now, just imagine what would happen if due process at the state level is gone. Now, let's go into a more extreme route when it comes to removing of the 14th Amendment, like a lot of individuals on the political right have stated that they want to do. Like the second section. Things like racial disparity would expand to the furthest reaches if Section 2 was removed. Period. Third, insurrection clause would justify January 6th for sure, in my personal opinion. And fourth, finally, the conspiracy in me would be this, because I do have a conspiracy on this. The Confederate supporters still know how much money they are owed by these debts. In fact, my whole thought process with this little theory that I have, that I would fully be in support of, is the reason why the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment were set up like that. Because I think it was done on purpose. It would make sense for the 3/5 repeal to be on the 13th Amendment and Section 2 to have been on the 15th Amendment. But why is it not there? I think it was done more intentionally. Yes, the 13th was specifically about abolishing slavery, but the idea of not seeing the repealing of the 3/5 compromise as an abolishment of these practices seems kind of wrong to me, that it's not in the 13th Amendment. And if the 15th Amendment focuses on voting rights, well, then it would only make sense for Section 2 under this amendment to be in the 15th Amendment rather than place it under the 14th Amendment with all of these other sections. It makes it very easy for anyone like Trump to completely take out a major pillar of our country's civil rights and practices by removing one amendment rather than three. Could you imagine if the President of the United States said, we're going to also remove or look at the removal of the 13th Amendment, which is the abolition of slavery? Not only would that be a bad look, but also no one would support that. And this is why, because of the stackedness of the 14th Amendment, why it must remain as it is. All of these court cases, all of these rights, all of these civil liberties and equalities that we have been given by this one amendment shows how extremely important it is. And true constitutionalists will agree with this exact statement. Yes, the first 10 are extremely important, but every amendment is important in their own right. I personally think that the 14th Amendment is an S-class amendment, just like the 1st through the 10th. In fact, I even think that the 9th and 10th are like more A tier, but I'll make a tier list of that later on in my whole thing. But if you like the video and the information that you've been given in this short amount of time, give a like, subscribe, comment down below on what other amendments I should look into for you. And let's hope that the 14th Amendment stays intact. See you soon.